My wife went on one date with a man who turned our whole family life upside down. I have always considered my wife to be the dearest person, the one you can rely on and trust. But what was my disappointment when my wife decided to go a very dirty way and suffered the corresponding consequences. I had really hoped I'd be rewarded tonight with a bonus, but deep down I doubted it. Sporting my dark blue tuxedo for the first time in 3 years, I must admit I looked quite sharp. However, I loathed dressing up to this extent. It was Friday night, after all, and I should have been comfortably seated in my favorite lazy boy, enjoying a quality single malt. Instead, I found myself seated at a table among colleagues and their spouses for a fundraising dinner and dance in support of Blessings in a backpack. This event was one of the most significant social gatherings of the year in our small Midwest town, with nearly everyone of importance in the area in attendance. My boss had purchased a table for the occasion, and both my wife and I were expected to be present. In fact, I had specifically instructed my wife to purchase a new, alluring dress for the evening, and she certainly didn't disappoint. If anything, she may have veered a bit too far on the side of seductive. "Damn it, darling," I said, attractive, not on the verge of an escort, I quipped as she walked down the stairs fully dressed for the evening. At 35, I believed my wife was at the peak of her beauty. Her luscious red hair was elegantly styled atop her head, complemented by dangling gold earrings that accentuated her graceful neck. She wore a silky maroon dress with a low-scoop neck design showcasing her ample chest, while the hemline ending mid-thigh displayed the results of her diligent leg workouts at the gym. I had anticipated her choosing a gown, but this dress made a bold statement, "Hey, look at me," and indeed, I couldn't help but admire her, knowing full well that every other man would also appreciate the sight. I didn't mind others admiring my wife, however, it was crucial for her to remember that I didn't share what was mine. I made that clear to her on numerous occasions. While I would have preferred to be relaxing in my recliner at home, Hester was in her element mingling with the elite of our city society. As a middle school teacher, opportunities for her to socialize were limited, but she possessed a natural charm that drew people to her effortlessly. With her intelligence and wit, she captivated those around her much like ants drawn to a picnic. We had mingled for a while and danced a few times before I headed to the bar and Hester returned to our table. As I approached our seats, I noticed Hester engaged in lively conversation with a man seated in my place. It turned out to be United States Senator Tomas Norberto, who bore a resemblance to a Hispanic version of Tom Selleck from his Magnum P.I. days. He was strikingly handsome, single, and stood at about 6 feet 4 inches, weighing 220 pounds. More renowned for his appearance than his intellect, he was being touted by some for the upcoming presidential race. I paused a few feet away, expecting my wife to acknowledge me, but she seemed completely taken by the senator, gazing at him with a level of infatuation I had never seen in her before, almost like a love-struck teenager. Since neither of them seemed inclined to acknowledge my presence, I decided to do it myself. "Excuse me, Senator, but that's my seat," I interjected as I arrived at my spot with 2 drinks in hand. He continued to disregard me and engaged further in conversation with my wife, whose face radiated with excitement. I waited silently for about 5 more seconds before abandoning my polite demeanor. I slid a wine glass between their faces, disrupting their interaction, and placed her glass on the table before her. Standing almost directly between them, holding my drink, I remained there until the esteemed senator finally caught on. "I should leave now. I need to find my place at the head table, but I'll return later to continue our discussion," he said to my wife, effectively ignoring me throughout. "Idiotic fool," I muttered to Hess as I resumed my seat after his departure. "I find him intriguing," she remarked. "You, however, were quite rude to a U.S. senator, for goodness sake. You seem to forget that you're my wife, not his, and he was occupying my seat without budging. That's incredibly impolite and presumptuous, even if he fancies himself the next president." She executed that particular eye roll with such finesse, a skill some women seem to possess effortlessly. I detested it, a sentiment I made abundantly clear to my wife throughout our 9 years together. As she shot me a glare, I avoided escalating the situation in front of our company. She harped in response, but refrained from speaking further. Dinner stretched on for about 90 minutes before the band resumed playing and guests returned to the dance floor. Knowing Hess enjoyed dancing, I rose from my seat and extended my hand to her. However, she declined vehemently, meeting my gaze with a firm shake of her head. Disappointed, I returned to the bar for another drink, engaging in small talk with other attendees. I lost sight of Hess when she began mingling, assuming she was socializing. However, keeping track of Senator Schmuck was effortless given his security detail. The senator continued to circulate and shake hands for the next half hour before stepping out onto an outdoor veranda. I'm not naive, so when Hess didn't return to the table after another 10 minutes, I decided to investigate the veranda. There, I found them engaged in a serious conversation with an elderly couple, the senator casually draping his arm around my wife's waist. I approached them and began to pry the senator's arm away, but someone suddenly grabbed me, twisting my arm painfully and drawing attention our way. "Nobody messes with the United States Senator, pal," a voice snarled behind me as I was pushed towards the exit. "That's my wife he's touching," I managed to say through gritted teeth as I was ushered out. He shoved me back into the main ballroom before releasing me. I demanded he fetch my wife unless he wanted me to cause a scene. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath as he turned back towards the senator. 2 minutes later, Hess returned, her face flushed red as she entered through the door. She shrugged with her palms up, indicating she had no idea what was going on. I grabbed her hand and practically pulled her out of the ballroom. The journey home began in complete silence, but I knew it wouldn't last. For some reason, Hess seemed to think that the best defense was a good offense. "You despicable person. You utterly embarrassed me tonight in front of a United States Senator," she yelled at me. Until that moment, I believed Hester and I had a solid marriage. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I was confident we would make it. Now, not so much. "You're aware that you're my wife," I retorted. "Nobody, even if he's the President of the United States, has the right to put his arm around you possessively. You know that's crossing a line, yet you didn't even attempt to escape from his embrace. You behaved like a smitten teenager with a crush." She blushed and stuttered, but ultimately remained silent, bowing her head. I knew I had hit the mark. She was undeniably infatuated with the man. If I entertained the notion that Hess would offer an apology, she swiftly dispelled that notion. Instead of apologizing, she barely acknowledged my presence for the next few days. Even our young children, aged 7 and 5, sensed the tension and tried to avoid being in the same room with us. Dinner was the only time when we attempted any semblance of conversation, using the children as intermediaries. However, on Wednesday night, after putting the kids to bed, Hess declared that we needed to have a conversation. Not a casual chat, not a suggestion, but a necessity. Those 4 words never herald anything positive. True to form, nothing positive emerged from that conversation. My beloved wife informed me that she and the esteemed senator were going on a date on Friday night. Actually, it's not a date at all. "I'm simply going to accompany him to another one of those fundraising dinners," Hess replied when I questioned the appropriateness of a married woman going out with a man who isn't her husband. "That sure sounds like a date to me," I countered. "If you're accompanying him, it implies you're his date. And given that you're married." "You have such a narrow-minded perspective," she retorted. "I would never betray you." "What would you call it, then, when a married woman goes out with a man who isn't her husband? Even if there's no intimacy going on, a date with someone else is still crossing a line," I argued. "Would you be okay with me taking your attractive friend Angie out for dinner and dancing?" She twisted her mouth, making a face and giving me her characteristic squinty-eyed glare. I knew mentioning her attractive friend would grab her attention. She had a clear issue when it came to Angie, who, as the Rolling Stones put it, could make a dead man come. That's completely different, and you know it. Going with a United States Senator is not the same as going on a date, she argued. Oh, right. Obviously, a huge difference. Listen, Hess, you can't go out with another guy, no matter how you phrase it. We're married. We made vows, remember? That forsaking all others part, I reminded her. You don't possess me, Reggie, even though we're married, she retorted. If I genuinely want to do something, I can and will. I'm not your property. Property. That's what happens when you marry a crossword enthusiast. You're certainly not my property, but you are the mother of my children, and I would really hate for you to break up our family, I pleaded. Her eyes widened in surprise. It seemed I had finally caught her attention. You wouldn't be that foolish, she scoffed. This is no, babe, this is a pivotal moment in our marriage. She grimaced once more but remained silent. I never expected this. I was utterly shocked when Hester descended the stairs in her outfit for her Friday night date. She wore a form-fitting strapless white lace gown that accentuated her curvaceous figure and revealed a generous portion of her ample chest. I hadn't seen the dress before and assumed she had bought it specifically for this occasion. Damn, I murmured in disbelief. She took my expletive as a compliment and gracefully twirled around. At that moment, our children burst into the room, catching sight of Hester and freezing in their tracks. Mom, you look like a princess, exclaimed our 7-year-old Elise. Why are you dressed so fancy? Hester glanced between our daughter and me, seemingly expecting me to come up with an explanation. But I remained silent, simply staring at my wife. I can't tell her, Hester stammered. You can't because you know it's not right, I said sharply. Explain to your daughter why you're leaving us, your family, to go on a date with a U.S. senator. Mommy has to attend a special event for a little while, Hester began. You be good for Daddy, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Why isn't Daddy going with you? 5-year-old Nate interjected. Hess paused as she struggled to fabricate a convincing lie, but I didn't need any time to speak the truth. I answered, because Mommy doesn't love me enough. Both children glanced at Hess with startled, pained expressions, and she returned the same look to me. The truth stings, doesn't it? I remarked. At that moment, the doorbell interrupted us. We all froze momentarily before it rang again. Here comes the moment of truth, honey. Him or us? I said. She answered the door on the third ring, revealing one of the senator's security team members, and I noticed the black limousine in the driveway. Remember to behave for Daddy. I'll see you tomorrow morning, she said as she left. I suppose it was him. I was stunned for a moment, then realized I still had children who needed attention. I would have liked to drown my sorrows in the liquor cabinet, but that wasn't an option. What was going to happen was a couple of FaceTime calls, one to my parents and one to hers. After all, the kids enjoyed talking to their grandparents on FaceTime. I began by speaking with Hester's parents. Our relationship had always been strong, and I anticipated that Hester's recent escapade wouldn't sit well with them. We exchanged laughs and jokes for about a minute until Hester's mother noticed her absence from the call. Where's my daughter, Reggie? Have you hidden her away in a suitcase? My mother-in-law quipped. No, Mom. Hester went out on a date with Senator Thomas Norberto. I expect she'll be back tomorrow, I replied softly. What? My mother-in-law exclaimed. A date? Are you certain, Reggie? She referred to it as accompanying the handsome senator to a fundraiser. I see it as a date, perhaps more, I explained. And she won't return until tomorrow, my astonished father-in-law interjected. And you simply allowed her to go? I tried to reason with her, Dad, but she insisted I didn't have control over her, I responded. I told her she'd be neglecting her family if she went through with it, but she seemed to believe it was a forgivable offense. The children then took over the conversation for the next 5 minutes, which I appreciated. Afterward, my mother-in-law instructed the kids to go to their rooms for a while, and she redirected the conversation toward my wife. Don't do anything impulsive or foolish, she advised. Communicate with her, Reggie. Don't just discard her. Think about the children. Like she did when she walked out the door, Mom. There was only a faint cough from my mother-in-law on the other end of the line. However, my own mother wasn't as sympathetic when I called my parents to tell them what had happened. I know a good lawyer, dear, she offered right away. She represented Aunt Elaine in her divorce from Uncle Will. She completely outmaneuvered Will's lawyer. That was certainly good to know. After making a few calls, I decided to order a pizza. My children and I watched the Disney movie they had chosen, although I had no idea which one. Later, when I put the kids to bed, I didn't even try to fall asleep. Instead, I was distracted by ESPN stories all evening, trying not to think about the fact that my wife might be with Senator Schmuck right now. When the kids woke up, I made a hearty breakfast of pancakes with bacon. Everyone knows that pancakes with bacon can taste better even when Mom is not at home. In the morning, they asked, "When will Mom be home?" And I replied, "She'll be back soon," even though it was a lie. I guess when you've already spent the whole night with a man who isn't your husband, there's no need to rush home. The black limousine didn't arrive in our driveway until nearly 1 in the afternoon. Our children were playing in the yard, and several neighbors were also outside when the car pulled up. Typically, the kids would have rushed to greet their mother after a day away, but this time they remained frozen in place. Hess seemed disappointed by the lack of a warm welcome before heading inside. Clearly, she was still wearing the same dress from the night before, but now it appeared wrinkled and lifeless. Her hair was loosely hanging around her shoulders, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who had been used. I shifted away from the window and settled into a chair in our living room. By the time she made it to the front door, I remained seated, not bothering to rise and greet her as she entered, appearing visibly exhausted. "Hey," she greeted. "Looks like you and the kids managed the night without me." "Looks like you barely made it through," I remarked pointedly. She blushed, making her way wearily towards the stairs. "Don't start, Reggie. Let me grab a nap in an hour," she coaxed. I raised my hands in mock surrender. Screw it. It was clear to me, at least, that our relationship was over. Now I just needed to find a way to make things as smooth as possible for my kids. I really didn't want to become a father who only sees his kids on weekends. The question on my mind was whether I could hold it together and remain in the house until the kids finished high school. Hester finally came downstairs around 7 p.m. I had already prepared dinner for the rest of us. I informed her there were leftovers in the fridge. She gave a weak smile. The children sensed something was wrong and kept their distance from Hester. "That's great, Reggie. Did you spend the whole day poisoning their minds against their mother?" she asked quietly when we were alone. Although that would have been easy, I didn't say anything to them, Hess. Kids are more perceptive than most people think. They saw you leave us last night and witnessed your grand return this afternoon, as did many of the neighbors. "Smooth move, by the way," I replied. "I suppose last night and this morning were worth alienating your kids and tearing apart our family." A brief flicker of guilt crossed her eyes before she adopted a defiant expression. "I didn't tear apart our family," she retorted. "That's up to you. If you can be mature and overcome your ego issues, we can repair and keep our family together. But if you want to be petty and vindictive, then I guess we'll go our separate ways, and you can be Mr. Part-Time Dad." I didn't anticipate the conversation taking this turn. I was expecting feelings of guilt and remorse, not defiance and anger. "1 in the afternoon, you idiot," I retorted. "Didn't get your fill the night before that you had to linger another half day? Just a fling, right?" She hesitated, avoiding eye contact. "We can move past this, Reggie, and return to how things were between us. I know I've hurt you. I'm sorry for that, but I had to do this for myself, and I don't regret it. It was an amazing night and morning. He's a genuinely great guy and a gentleman. I hope that wasn't supposed to be an apology, because if it was, you're really bad at it," I remarked. "I'm only apologizing for hurting you, not for anything else." "It was an incredible experience," she said firmly. If my eyes had been lasers, I would have stared Hess into oblivion. "That wasn't exactly a pleasant experience for me," I remarked, attempting to mirror her level of conviction. "You broke your promises to me and ultimately to our family, and you did it quite easily. Hess seemed taken aback as I entered our guest bedroom at bedtime. "What are you doing?" she inquired. "We can't move forward if you're not willing to try." "No. I tried to prevent you from betraying me before it occurred. Now it's too late," I clarified. She regarded me with the expression of dealing with a stubborn child. "We can't rewind time, Reggie. We need to look ahead," she insisted. "You're right, babe. We can't turn back time, but we wouldn't be dealing with any of this if you had simply done the right thing and not met with SRA, I retorted. "This is on you. You made the choice. Remember, you said I didn't control you. You made your own grown-up decision. It's not my fault it was the wrong decision for our family." But, she trailed off as I gently ushered her out of the room and locked the door behind her. I slept deeply, likely due to being awake for 48 hours straight and the stress of the situation. It had become a family tradition for me to prepare a lavish breakfast on Sunday mornings. That day, I decided to make Belgian waffles using my high-end waffle maker. As we were enjoying our meal, Hester emerged from the master bedroom, appearing disheveled as if she hadn't slept a wink. "Wow, Mom. Dad cooked us a big breakfast both days this weekend," exclaimed Elise. "Maybe you should go out more often on Friday nights." Hess glanced at the three of us, burst into tears, and hurried back into the bedroom. The children appeared bewildered. "Did I say something wrong?" Elise asked innocently, being 7. "No, sweetie. I think Mommy was just sad she missed the waffles," I reassured gently. Later in the day, I was lounging in my lazy boy watching my Chicago Cubs triumph over the St. Louis Cardinals when I heard the bedroom door slam open with such force that the doorknob collided with the wall. Barely 5 seconds later, an agitated Hester stood before me, babbling incoherently and gesturing wildly. "How could you?" Something to that effect came out of her mouth amid sprays of spittle. It was repulsive. "Take it easy, honey. I can't make out a word you're saying, and you're drooling and spitting all over," I remarked. She screamed, tears mingling with the mess on her face. "How could you tell my parents about my date? Now they think I'm the biggest fool this side of the Kardashians." "What's a Kardashian, Mommy?" Elise inquired as she and Nate rushed into the room upon hearing the commotion. I arched my eyebrows at my wife, meeting her intense gaze. She made a determined effort to compose herself before instructing the kids to go play in their rooms. As the children left, she positioned herself in front of my recliner. "Spill it," she whispered sharply as soon as she heard the bedroom doors close. "I didn't see any reason to keep it from your parents, considering you were simply accompanying a United States senator to a fundraiser, as you eloquently put it," I replied. "If they happen to share my assessment of the situation, it's not my fault. By the way, my parents had a similar reaction, and you might want to watch out the next time my mom gets too close." "No, it's not like that," she began, then abruptly stopped. "A remarkable experience," I interjected. "If looks could hurt, I'd be just a stain on a chair, but it didn't bother me much." Motioning for her to move over so I could see the TV, I said, before she ran out of the room. For the next 2 weeks, I continued to sleep in the guest room. Noticing this, I explained to the children that I had a cold and didn't want their mother to catch it. I suspected that Elise had figured out my lie, but she wisely kept her thoughts to herself, a pretty smart 7-year-old kid. Without saying a word, one night I found myself back in our shared bed. An hour after Hess went upstairs, I quietly slipped into bed. When the alarm went off the next morning, she snuggled up to me. "It feels so good," she murmured. "It's time for you to come to your senses." She tried to touch me. I prevented her by putting my hand on her forearm and pulling her hand away. I changed positions so that we were facing each other on the bed. Some actions are most appropriate to perform when you can make direct eye contact. "You're going to have to get tested and give me the results before I decide to sleep with you again," I said softly. "You might be willing to trust the senator, but I'm not." Tears welled up in her eyes. She seemed about to speak but decided not to. Instead, she just nodded. It showed me that she and the senator weren't using protection. The situation was becoming more and more intriguing. My initial plan was to stay until the kids finished high school, which meant another 14 years until Nate went off to college. I was willing to endure because of my love for them. However, I couldn't imagine going without intimacy for that long, especially with an attractive woman living in the same house. Despite the implications for my character, I had reached a point where I didn't care much anymore. The affection I once had for this woman suffered a significant blow 2 weeks ago and continued to diminish every day. I observed her leaving the bed with a sorrowful expression. In the past, that sight would have devastated me, and I would have done anything to alleviate her sadness. Now my own pain prevented me from reaching out to her. Who was this woman now? The woman I married 9 years ago, who I've been with for the past 11, would have known without a doubt that I would never agree to her seeing another man, let alone engaging in intimacy with someone else. Hester and I crossed paths during our final year in college. 3 months later, we were exclusively dating, and within 2 years, we tied the knot. She worked as an actuary at a national insurance company, one of those individuals who quietly crunch numbers in a cubicle to determine insurance rates. I always perceived her as analytical and honest, though perhaps lacking a bit in spontaneity and humor, qualities that I, on the other hand, brought to the table with my disorganized yet fun-loving nature. I believed our differences complemented each other well, envisioning a future where we'd celebrate 50 years of marriage. Little did I anticipate the entrance of Senator Tomas Norberto into our lives. About 10 days after I returned to our shared bed, Hester handed me an envelope as I walked through the door after work. It contained her clean bill of health. "I hope you're pleased," she muttered bitterly. "You have no idea how humiliating that was. I might never be able to face Dr. Sanjay again." "Not my fault, babe," I responded flatly. "Keep your legs closed to anyone who isn't your husband, and you won't have to feel embarrassed." She snarled softly but was unable to retaliate. She began to walk away, but I wasn't quite done. "How often has the senator been in touch with you since the date?" I inquired. "We haven't been in contact," she started before I extended my hand, silencing her. She understood my intent. With a pained expression, she reached into her pocket and handed me her phone. Swiftly, I located what I assumed was his number, uncovering several texts and 2 phone calls linked to it. There seemed to be no indication that they had met again, though he had made efforts. While her texts didn't suggest encouragement, they also didn't convey discouragement. "Damn it," I exclaimed. "We're walking on thin ice, Hess. If I find out about another date, our children may be orphaned because I'll end up in jail after I'm done with both of you. Understood?" Returning her phone, she took it solemnly and shoved it back into her pocket before making her way to the kitchen. One night later, she showed me signs of attention in bed, and my animal instincts got the better of me. I didn't have feelings for her, I just wanted to satisfy my needs. I knew perfectly well that she was trying to win back my favor, but I didn't care. I was more worried about something else. Given Hess's dramatic return home a few weeks earlier, I couldn't help but reflect on the local gossip. Although no one addressed me directly, I caught the sympathetic glances of some men and the barely concealed grins of some women. However, I didn't have to think for long because one evening, when I was sitting on the back porch in deep thought and Hess was engrossed in the TV in the living room, Eliza came up to me. "Dad, what is a club for women of easy virtue and how did Mommy become a member of it?" "What is it?" she asked softly. Darn it. The damage to my ego wasn't nearly as concerning as the repercussions reaching my children. I knew I had to refrain from speaking before I reacted. "Where did you hear that, darling?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a neutral tone so as not to intimidate her. "The girls mentioned that their moms have been gossiping and laughing about Mommy being part of a club for girls of easy virtue, and it doesn't sound good. Are all the adults in our family part of this club, Dad?" Considering myself a decent poker player, I had to exert every bit of skill to keep my expression unreadable as I addressed my daughter. "Mommy made a mistake recently, Eliza. It's something between Mommy and Daddy, nothing for you to worry about." The other moms shouldn't have been discussing it, nor should they be discussing that club. I want you to walk away when the other girls bring up that club. It's our issue, sweetheart, not yours. I'm sorry the other girls were unkind to you. I hugged her gently, hiding the tears in my eyes, hoping she wouldn't notice. This moment will remain in my memory until my last breath. Gradually, a sense of normality began to return to life in our house, at least from my point of view, and yet it was a new kind of normality. Regardless of whether Hess admitted it or not, things would never go back to what they were before that day. I couldn't fully trust her again, and I couldn't forgive or forget the huge disrespect she showed me and our family. Love? Well, to borrow a line from a Tina Turner song, what does love have to do with it? 6 months later, Hess seemed to understand something or perhaps had the courage to speak up. After that night initiated by her, which had become commonplace since that day, I, as usual, turned away from her to sleep. Before she spoke, I heard her choking sobs. Reggie, can we talk?" she asked timidly. "Yes," I sighed. "Could you please turn around?" she asked, and there was clearly irritation in her voice. I sighed, trying to feign her annoyance, then turned to her, meeting her gaze. She kept looking into my eyes. "Do you realize that we haven't been close since?" "Say it, Hess, just say it," I insisted. "You had the courage to do it, have the courage to admit it. We haven't been close since I had a date. I noticed you satisfy me physically and then you go to sleep. You make sure that I'm happy, but it feels purely physical, and you haven't hugged me since." "I miss that intimacy," she said. "You can't even say those words, baby," I retorted. "Your date? Ha! You cheated on me with this guy. Admit it. I'm not stupid. You go on a date with another man and don't come back until the next day. Do you think I don't notice anything? You make it seem cheap and disgusting," she protested. "Yes, we had intimacy on Saturday night, and it was great. He was gentle and caring, just like you. Really, it was an unforgettable experience, and that's why we're not making love anymore. Hess, don't you see? You gave him something that, as you promised, was exclusively mine, and you liked it all. It was unforgettable, as you just said. Oh, come on, Reggie, it was just one night, 2 days out of the thousands of days that we will be married. From a statistical point of view, this is insignificant. We can forget about it if you're willing to try," she pleaded. "Thanks for the math lesson, Hess, but I never saw our marriage as a math problem. Would you feel the same way about it if I did it with Mary Jo Young?" Mary Jo Young, a divorced blonde with a good figure, lived nearby. Almost every woman on our street was closely watching how she interacted with their husbands. "Wait, are you implying that you want Mary Jo?" "No way," she exclaimed. "Listen to yourself, Hess. I never said I wanted Mary Jo, you did. I was just asking how you would react if I did," I explained. She seemed puzzled until she realized what was going on, and then her expression turned to anger. "I can read between the lines." "No need for words," I said smugly. She avoided looking me in the eye. "Do you realize that because of what happened, the other girls in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They heard their mothers calling you names." "It was unpleasant," I said. Her anger was replaced by shock at this revelation. "Eliza never mentioned it." "Oh," she breathed, digesting what she had heard. "I'm really sorry." "Not sorry enough. You described that evening as unforgettable." "Well, it was definitely unforgettable for both of us." "I will never forget your betrayal," I said. With that, I turned away and went to bed, unaware of her subsequent actions. Credit must be given to Hester. Over the next few months, she dedicated herself to being an exemplary mother. Traditionally, I had been the primary caregiver for our children, but suddenly Hester took on her share of responsibilities, shuttling the kids to their various activities and enthusiastically supporting them. It made me wonder if she had finally realized that prioritizing our family over her own desires was the key to keeping us together. What a revelation! The children seemed to appreciate the extra attention, but once again my daughter demonstrated her remarkable perceptiveness beyond her 8 years. "Mom is really making an effort, Daddy," she remarked to me one day. "I hope she has apologized properly for whatever she did wrong." I tried to respond with a genuine smile, acknowledging her acute awareness. To the outside world, everything seemed fine at the Wilkerson household. I worked diligently to maintain appearances. Hester, on her part, seemed willing to go to great lengths not only to keep up appearances but also to regain my favor. We were two individuals residing under the same roof, enjoying certain benefits. Although she harbored a strong desire for a return to complete normalcy, believing that I would eventually yield to her wishes, somewhere within me, remnants of my love for her still lingered. However, I couldn't simply erase 9 years of her being the central focus of my life. She made things more difficult for herself by maintaining contact with the senator. After I checked her phone calls and messages shortly after her date, she made sure to keep them cleared. However, she was unaware of how simple it was to clone someone's phone for access to all their messages. It appeared that he kept in regular touch while she seemed to be attempting to keep him at a distance, at least for now. "Can we arrange another date soon?" "I'll be in town," he texted almost a month ago. "My husband is still upset about last time." "I can't risk it," she replied. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. A month later, we marked our 10th anniversary with a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids had a blast, but Hester didn't. She waited until the kids were occupied with games before expressing her disappointment with me. We've always celebrated our anniversaries together, just the two of us, with a special night. You've changed the tradition because you're still holding a grudge. When did you become so petty and small? She remarked. Once again, the answer to that question is the same as many others, the day of your date. You did this to me, to us, and to yourself, I responded. Can't you move past this? She pleaded. How often do you two communicate? I asked pointedly. She dared to smirk before reaching into her pocket, retrieving her phone, and passing it to me. I tossed it up high into the air, catching it effortlessly upon its descent. I know you've been unfaithful, but I also recognize your intelligence. I'd wager there's no evidence of your affair on that phone, not since I confiscated it the first time. However, there are records of past texts and calls. You may not have initiated, but I've never heard you outright reject the guy either. Why is that? Her cheeks reddened as she diverted her gaze. Yeah, I knew it was a rhetorical question, I muttered. My job and my children were my anchors during this tumultuous period, though my coworkers often remarked that I appeared in need of a solid night's rest, or perhaps 6. I was certain I was developing an ulcer. My alcohol consumption had increased, and sleep was elusive. There were nights when I lay awake for hours, staring at my wife, pondering what had gone wrong. She insisted she loved me, rationalizing her actions as separate from our relationship. She felt entitled to her night out with the senator and expressed no remorse for her actions, only regret for the pain she caused me. I waited anxiously for the other shoe to drop. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law emerged as a source of support during this trying time. She repeatedly expressed regret for her daughter's behavior. We're sorry, Reggie. We didn't raise her to be so selfish, but I genuinely hope you can find a way to move past this. I know you're doing it for the children, she confided during one of her calls to check on me. Entering the kitchen, I reached for another cooler of beer to bring outside. It was our regular monthly summer gathering in the neighborhood. Outside, we had 2 grills fired up, offering an array of hot and cold dishes, fruits, desserts, and various drinks. The weather was ideal, sunny, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, with barely a breeze. The gathering had been underway for a few hours and was likely to continue for another 5 or 6. These events were always a blast for both kids and adults alike. As I made my way through the house, I caught the sound of female voices emanating from our home office. Since the office was off-limits to non-family members, I intended to redirect whoever it was to the family room or living area. While most of the action was outdoors, occasionally someone sought refuge indoors for some air conditioning or quiet conversation. However, that particular room posed a challenge. Yeah, sometimes when Reggie really takes control, I think of him. He's dominant, powerful, and goes after what he wants. There are moments when I can't help but reminisce about that night. It's a memory I'll cherish forever, Hester declared to whoever she was with. I froze in my steps. My knees buckled, and I nearly stumbled. Damn it. How many people are aware that I'm being cheated on? I heard laughter. It seemed like there were 3 of them inside. I couldn't catch the rest of the conversation because I was too busy trying to hold back vomit. I felt relieved that I managed to reach the bathroom before getting sick, emptying out everything I had eaten the night before, breakfast and lunch. After cleaning up, I grabbed the cooler of beer and headed outside. I opened 2 bottles and handed them to the 2 guys currently manning the grills. Hey, Reggie, are you all right? You seem a bit off, remarked John. Just preoccupied, John. Everything's fine, I replied before drifting away. I remained quiet for the rest of the gathering. When Hess and her companions returned, I felt like I was being observed and noticed smirks directed my way. Maybe I was becoming paranoid, but eventually, it seemed like almost all the women at the barbecue were smirking at me. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed and finishing cleanup, I confronted my wife about my disappointment. She sat on a lounge chair, sipping a wine cooler, looking satisfied. I settled beside her. Did anyone visit today who doesn't know about your affair? I asked earnestly. She appeared shocked, feigning innocence. I stared back at her. I might have mentioned it to a few girlfriends recently. It was a thrilling experience, she chuckled. A charming senator. I couldn't resist sharing. So first you cheat, then you embarrass me to your friends, meaning every husband now knows you're unfaithful and I'm a cuckold. I'm not unfaithful, and I won't tolerate being called that, she shouted. It was just one carelessness. I didn't sleep with some stranger in a cheap motel. Her eyes shimmered with intensity as she stood up from her chaise. I've had enough of this, she declared, her voice escalating in volume. You've been playing games for over a year now. Your wife had a fling with another man, a handsome, strong man. It's time to move on. I won't be held hostage by your insecurities any longer. If you can't let go, that's your problem. Either file for divorce or accept reality. I'm tired of living a lie with you pretending to be Mr. Perfect. Make a decision already. I was taken aback by her outburst, sitting in shock for what felt like ages, though it was probably only moments. When I returned to my senses, she had already walked away, leaving me alone. I'm naturally reserved and slow to react. While some, including my wife, interpret this as weakness, I rarely panic or act rashly. It saddened me to think about not seeing my children every day. Although I hoped to salvage my family, I was prepared for the worst. I had a lawyer ready to fight for me, and first thing Monday morning, I took action. Hester was served with divorce papers at her workplace before the day was out. Predictably, she was not pleased. About 5 minutes after she was served, my phone began buzzing incessantly. I ignored all of her calls, anticipating the impending storm upon my return home. As I walked into the house from the garage, Hester unleashed a torrent of anger. You idiot, she screamed. Your fragile male ego gets bruised, and you humiliate me in front of my colleagues. Much like you humiliated me in front of our friends and neighbors the other day, I retorted. You practically begged me to file, so I did. She shot me a disdainful look but remained silent. Setting down my belongings, I sought out my children for a brief conversation, reassuring them of my enduring love despite not living under the same roof starting tomorrow. Elise grasped the situation, having friends with divorced parents, but Nate seemed confused. I knew I had my work cut out with him, though I was confident my daughter would lend a hand. We resided in a no-fault state, making the divorce process seemingly straightforward. She was set to gain primary custody of the children, the house, child support, and some alimony. But, for some inexplicable reason known only to her, she vehemently contested it. Her attorney employed various tactics to prolong the proceedings, insisting on meetings and even suggesting marital counseling. What's the deal, Hess? Your actions speak louder than words. You claim to love me, yet you've caused so much strife, and then you have the audacity to boast to your friends about him being the best you've ever had. Why would I want to endure this marriage when all I get is aggravation? I adore my children, but if I stay with you, all they'll remember is a bitter man, I expressed during one session. But I do love you, Reggie. You're fixated on one incident. Yes, he was exceptional, but it was a one-time mistake. Please let it go, she pleaded. I can't, Hess, I retorted. You betrayed our vows, and you downplay its significance. I can't overlook that. You made promises to me. I hadn't intended to do it. Truly, I hadn't, but everyone has their breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system lies in its dichotomy. Regardless of how you characterize it, the senator belonged to one faction, which meant the opposing party would eagerly welcome any information that tarnished his reputation. Over a year ago, following Hess's date, I established a contingency plan. I enlisted the help of a well-connected attorney in our city to approach the chairman of the opposing political party. The chairman, eager for anything that could disrupt the senator's re-election prospects and jeopardize his White House ambitions, eagerly awaited the information. Despite offering a substantial monetary reward, he had to settle for the assurance that the evidence would only be disclosed if the possessor desired it. Every month, my attorney updated me on the chairman's persistent requests. This month, we were ready to fulfill the chairman's wishes. The meeting, which marked my first involvement, was scheduled at my attorney's office. After introductions, I retrieved a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. The chairman's astonishment was palpable as he glimpsed the contents of the bag. "Dear God," he murmured. "Is that what I suspect it to be? If you suspect it's the downfall of Senator Dickhead's career, then yes," I replied. The chairman gazed at the bag as though it held precious gold bars. He refrained from reaching out to touch it. Instead, he simply continued staring with an expression of utter amazement. "How," he whispered. "That arrogant woman returned home and headed upstairs for a shower," I recounted. "Since she handles the laundry, I suppose she felt confident I'd never sift through the basket. I waited until I heard the water running, slipped into the bathroom, and discovered the panties at the bottom of the hamper. Anyone who watches TV nowadays knows about DNA. I'm certain that when you have these tested, you'll find two distinct sets. By the way, here's her toothbrush for DNA comparison. I assume you'll manage to obtain the senator's sample to match, unless you already have it," I added, giving the chairman a stern look. He flushed and glanced away, just as I suspected. I knew that he already knew all the details of the situation, so there was no need to repeat it again. However, I noticed that his face reflected the unspoken question, why? Because she's not smart enough to understand that she shouldn't mess with me. She cheated on me, but she arrogantly believes that I will eventually forgive her. Now she's even flaunting it in front of me. "To hell with her and the senators he's associated with," I exclaimed. "Your career is over, Thomas Norberto. Damn it, you foolish woman. How on earth did your weak husband manage to gather proof of our weekend together?" Norberto yelled at Hester over the phone a week after I met with the chairman. I don't know. I have no clue what you're talking about," she stammered. I was taken aback when the call appeared on the phone I had used to clone hers. I had basically admitted to her that I had bugged her phone several months ago, and they hadn't been using that method of communication if they had been communicating at all. "What have you done, Reggie?" she asked when I answered her call 90 minutes later. I knew exactly what she meant, but I was feeling mischievous. "Huh?" I replied. "I just ordered a pepperoni pizza and garlic bread. Why would you even care what I eat? Wait, how do you even know what I'm eating?" She snarled at me. I could tell from past experience that she truly despised my foolish behavior. She may have seemed convinced that I was a weakling, but she knew I wasn't foolish. Well, I suppose being right about one thing out of two wasn't too bad. I'm not sure how you managed it, but it seems you've exacted some sort of revenge on Senator Norberto. He threatened to rough me up over something you did, but he wouldn't disclose what it was. Thanks for that, by the way. My parents are furious with me. Yours are too. Elise has been giving me the cold shoulder, and you just can't seem to shake the idea that what Thomas and I did was separate from our relationship. Yeah, about that, I began. 2 months after my meeting with the chairman, Senator Norberto, practically guaranteed to retain his seat, suddenly withdrew from the Senate race 8 months before the election, citing extreme mental exhaustion. With everything else happening in my life, seeking female companionship was the least of my concerns. I hadn't even looked at a woman in an attractive way for several months. It was my daughter who asked me about it. Daddy, when are you going to start dating other women? Elise asked cheerfully during the second weekend my kids were with me. Linda's mom really wants to go out with you. I found myself dumbfounded, my jaw likely hanging open. Caught up in the whirlwind of divorce, I hadn't really considered my future much beyond tending to my kids every other weekend and for a couple of weeks in the summer. Linda's mom mentioned this, and you're fine with it? I asked, feeling taken aback. Well, she didn't tell me directly, Dad. I overheard her talking to Annie's mom, Elise explained. But yes, I'd be okay with it, Dad. I don't want you to be alone. But please, Dad, not Marcy's mom. None of us kids like her. Kids pick up on things, Dad. Linda's mom had been divorced from her no-good, despicable husband for around 5 years. She was a charming, vivacious blonde with curves, exuding the effervescent personality of the former cheerleader she once was. I had no inkling that she might be interested in me. When you're married, you don't go around considering other women's potential, or at least I didn't. Was I naive? Unbeknownst to me, Elise was observing me closely. It's all right, Dad. I'm almost 9. I understand about divorce and stuff. Nate and I will be fine. You just take care of yourself, she said. And just like that, it seemed I was back in the dating scene. Linda's mother, Julie, was my first date after re-entering the dating scene, and it was enjoyable. Feeling a sense of obligation, I disclosed to her that I wasn't emotionally ready for anything serious, considering my recent return to dating. She responded with a comforting smile, assuring me that I didn't need to justify myself to every person I dated. Julie imparted valuable advice, almost like a crash course in dealing with divorced parents. She also warned me that I might attract attention from other divorced mothers of my kids' friends, given my reputation as a good guy, father with a decent job, and, well, not unattractive. She blushed a bit as she mentioned the last part. I went on to date Julie and a few other divorced mothers sporadically. Thoughts of my ex-wife Hester and our past marriage rarely crossed my mind. Occasionally, I acknowledged feeling lonely, but it wasn't enough to consider reconciling with her. I refused to dwell on the possibility of her betraying me again. Hester, however, wasn't hesitant to dismiss her affair as a mere silly mistake, insisting she'd never repeat it. A silly mistake? I scoffed. It was poor judgment, a lack of respect, and ultimately selfishness. You chose an affair with the senator over your family's love. Her mouth opened and closed twice. I could sense her desire to respond, but she found herself speechless, realizing there was nothing she could say to defend her position. I half expected her to persist, especially given that contacting the senators seemed futile now. My ex-mother-in-law informed me one Saturday during dinner while the kids and I were visiting that he had instructed her never to reach out to him again. He seems convinced that you played a role in his withdrawal from the senatorial race and believes she didn't do enough to intervene, she recounted. I raised an eyebrow and continued eating silently, choosing not to offer any remarks. A few months later, some of the guys from work suggested trying out a new upscale bar with a dance floor on a Thursday evening. I used to avoid such outings like the plague when I was married, but as a single man, I found myself going out regularly. 4 of us secured a table, ordered drinks, and surveyed the scene, taking in the atmosphere of the place. As soon as two women entered, they caught my attention. The first woman looked to be in her early 40s, but she was dressed in a style more suitable for those over 30, trying to create an atmosphere of youth. She wore a silk blue blouse that was partially unbuttoned and a short skirt that showed off her long, athletic legs. With short dark brown hair and green eyes, she seemed to radiate confidence. Her companion, on the other hand, seemed somewhat out of place in the bar setting. She looked a little older than her friend, perhaps in her early 50s, and exuded an aura of sophistication and wealth. Dressed in a sweater and skirt clearly bought in expensive boutiques, she exuded elegance and beauty with shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes. Taking a seat at a table not far from us, the women immediately attracted the attention of men who were ready to offer their company or dance. I couldn't help thinking that I wouldn't mind dancing with one of them in particular. The dark-haired woman seemed ready to have fun and maybe more. She didn't hesitate to dance with any man who invited her. On the contrary, the blonde woman danced only a few times and seemed more restrained in her movements. An hour later, I decided to ask the blonde woman to dance. However, when I approached her table, the brunette suddenly grabbed my hand and led me to the dance floor. Completely absorbed in her, I forgot about her friend. We danced to a couple of fun songs before the tempo slowed down. I was shocked when she kissed me passionately. I was charmed. We left the club together and headed to my house. We were too involved in bed, and that evening she shared the details of her life. It turned out that she and her friend were celebrating her recent divorce. Rosie was an amazing lover, and we continued to date for about a month until she expressed her reluctance to commit herself so soon after the divorce. I understood her point of view, and we parted amicably. However, since that first meeting, I have never had the opportunity to ask her about her friend, which aroused my unquenchable curiosity. A few weeks later, I found myself alone in the bar of another upscale establishment, seeking solace over a drink after a busy week. It wasn't my turn to take care of the children, so I was on my own for the weekend. She entered the room alone, and let me tell you that all eyes were on her. She had a figure reminiscent of Megan Thee Stallion, with a lush cascade of loose brown curls crowning her head and falling over her shoulders. She gracefully walked over to me on 4-inch stilettos and sat down next to me. Damn it, I was convinced that I had ascended to heaven. I was thinking feverishly, trying to come up with a dazzling opening phrase, but before I could speak, she looked into my eyes and asked me what to drink. Angel's envy, I replied, grinning, and my thoughts instantly scattered as I looked at her. Oh, great choice. A man with fine taste, she purred. She ordered the same drink, undiluted like mine, and spent the evening telling me stories about the boutique marketing company she founded many years ago. Amazing. Not only was she amazing and smart, but she also owned a thriving business. A couple of hours later, we left the bar together and headed to her amazing apartment. She mentioned that she preferred to make love in her own bed, which is shared by most women, and delved into the psychology behind it. I seriously doubted that she was 45 years old, given her impeccably toned physique. Our first meeting was excellent. She was an amazing kisser, and I felt a connection with her that I hadn't felt since my date with Hester. In just one night, Mariel Washington opened up to me more honestly than Hester did in our 9 years of marriage. Mariel confessed that her commitment lay primarily with her career, and she had no desire for children, preferring instead casual relationships with several men. I felt a genuine connection with her and would have potentially fallen in love, but since that wasn't an option, I agreed to be friends with benefits. For the next year, we met about once a month until Mariel unexpectedly fell in love with a much younger man. Lucky guy. Occasionally, my ex-mother-in-law would call me. Despite the divorce, we remained close, bonded by understanding and the grandchildren. I still referred to them as Mom and Dad. Could I ask you for a favor, Reggie? She asked cautiously. Of course, as long as it doesn't involve your daughter, I replied. The favor involved escorting the personal administrator of my mother-in-law for their company's upcoming Christmas party. Seriously, she's a decent person, Reggie. She went through a divorce a couple of years back with an abusive cheater, and I don't think she's dated anyone since. She's been hurt, Reggie, and she needs a decent guy to prove not all men are scoundrels. And I believe you're that decent guy, my ex-mother-in-law explained. Isn't it strange when your former mother-in-law tries to set you up on a date? Just one thing, Mom, I interjected, please tell me she's not dull. Mom got the joke and chuckled. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, Reggie. You might even let us have the kids for an overnight or two, she teased. Mom was spot on. I was pleasantly surprised. Sharon Cito was a petite bundle of charm with a physical presence that boasted well-proportioned assets. She was sociable without being overly bubbly and had a cute habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when she was happy. Equally important, she genuinely had a great personality. I made a point to stick close to Sharon throughout the evening, giving her my full attention just as I would have with my ex-wife. Sherry seemed delighted with the gesture. She was engaging in conversation, though she tended to defer to others, which I guess was understandable given her background. We sat with my in-laws at a table. Mom displayed her usual grace, while Dad initially seemed a bit reserved. I understood his demeanor, but he gradually became more open as the evening progressed. I surprised Sharon with my dancing skills, which I had learned to please my ex-wife Hester, who loved dancing. Sharon also showed proficiency, especially in fast dances, and seamlessly fit with me in slow dances as if we had been together for years. I enjoyed the sensation of her body pressed against mine. As I escorted Sherry to the door, she gave me a gentle kiss on the lips and shared her phone number. After waiting 3 days, I called Sherry and asked her out. She agreed to a date the following Friday at one of the city's top Italian restaurants, followed by an art show at a local gallery. Sherry dressed more provocatively for our date than she had at the Christmas party, impressing me even more. We had a fantastic time, and we continued to go out 3 more times before deciding it was time for her to meet my 8-year-old daughter and for me to meet her daughter. We spent quality time together playing miniature golf and having a picnic at a nearby park. Overall, I felt it went well, especially since the 2 girls bonded remarkably, although my son, as expected for his age, wasn't as thrilled, considering all girls had cooties. Sherry and I met frequently each week, and when I had my kids, we engaged in family activities involving all 5 of us. Everything was going well until a few weeks into the new school year when I received an unexpected call from Hester. I don't know what your girlfriend has been teaching my kids, but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting, and his face looks beaten up. He's been given 3 days of detention, and all he's saying is that it started with this Monique girl he keeps referring to as his sister, she shouted at me over the phone. Firstly, you don't have the right to call my girlfriend names like that. As for Nate, I'll come over after dinner to take him out for some ice cream. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know what really happened, I responded calmly. I heard her sigh before she hung up. After dinner, I picked up Nate, and we went to a small family-owned ice cream shop. As soon as he got into my car, I gave him a thorough visual inspection. He had a cut on his lip and a scrape on the left side of his face. You should see the other guy, Dad, he quipped. How about the truth, Nathan Abraham, I responded, using his full name to convey seriousness. He winced at the use of both his first and middle names. Some kid was bothering M.O., Dad. I told him to leave my sister alone. He threw the first punch, then I hit him pretty hard. They say I broke his nose. It made a loud crack, and there was blood everywhere, he explained, trying to suppress a grin. The boy bothering M.O. was 2 years older than Nate. When I talk to M.O., will she tell me the same story? I inquired. Definitely, Dad. I wouldn't have hit him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. I was just protecting M.O. You always tell me to look out for Elise, so I figured it applied to M.O. too. She's so small, Dad, Nate justified. She is, Nate, and you did the right thing, I replied, unable to conceal the pride in my voice. Monique inherited her petite stature from her mother, standing at least half a head shorter than most of her classmates. I had always emphasized to Nate the importance of looking out for his sister, and it seemed he now considered Monique as part of his family. It was intriguing how sometimes the innocence of youth could surpass the wisdom of age. I'm proud of you for defending MO, but keep it between us, I told him. I'll speak with the principal and see what can be done. You might want to fill your mother in on Mo's situation. It seems you and Elise haven't been keeping her fully informed about my life, which I appreciate, by the way. But it might be better if it comes from you and Elise, I suggested. My 7-year-old understood perfectly. Children mature so quickly these days. Oh, and Dad, when are you and Sherry tying the knot? She's amazing, you know, he added. As I said, they grow up fast, and he was right, it was time to commit to that woman. The following day, I contacted the principal. The school enforced a strict zero-tolerance policy regarding fighting, irrespective of whether a student was acting in self-defense. Nonetheless, they also upheld a zero-tolerance approach towards bullying. Consequently, the perpetrator received a 6-day detention following interviews with witnesses. Although I disagreed with the policy, I advised Nate to accept his punishment naturally. Furthermore, I assured him of my support and promised to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford the ring. Things got messy when Hester discovered that Sherry was Mom's personal assistant and that Mom had arranged their initial meeting. What on earth, Mom? Aren't you supposed to be on my side? Hester yelled at her. There's no your side, Mom responded. He's not coming back to you. You completely messed that up, so why let a good man go to waste? Sharon is a wonderful woman and a great friend. She deserves someone like Reggie. The scream that came from Hester was described by Mom as horrifying as she recounted the incident. While both my children enjoyed Sherry's company, my daughter, in particular, seemed to admire her nurturing demeanor towards me. Sherry had a natural inclination to fulfill my desires, making me feel like the master of my domain. This, in turn, encouraged me to treat her as my queen. Elise appeared to delight in witnessing the affectionate competition between Sherry and me. I'm not sure if you two are endearing or nauseating, Elise remarked one day, but I enjoy being around to witness it. A couple of months later, our small wedding included only our 3 children, my parents, and my ex-in-laws as guests. The court clerk who officiated the ceremony was taken aback when my ex-mother-in-law stood as Sherry's maid of honor. It's quite a tale, I chuckled when she inquired. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition originates from the classic British comedy ensemble Monty Python's Flying Circus, but truth be told, nobody anticipates an inquiry from a federal marshal either. It caught me completely off guard when 2 such officials entered my office on a Monday morning. It seemed the authorities were displeased about a certain former senator's altercation and subsequent injury in the restroom of an upscale restaurant in Houston, Texas. My name, along with that of several other aggrieved husbands, surfaced as potential suspects. I clarified to them that my alibi involved being at home with my wife and 3 children, several hundred miles away from the scene of the crime. I can't say I'm sorry to hear about the senator's troubles. Nobody, and I truly mean that, deserves it more, I remarked to the discontented marshals. You do realize that the fool slept with my then-wife almost 4 years ago? If I had any intentions, wouldn't I have acted long before now? I retorted with heavy sarcasm. However, the grilling from the federal agents was just the beginning. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press showed up at my office seeking details about the aforementioned incident. It appeared he had somehow obtained a confidential roster of 26 women the senator allegedly had affairs with during his time in office. At this juncture, several individuals were aware of Hester's rendezvous with the senator, though I certainly didn't broadcast it. Over the years, Hester likely disclosed it to more people than I did, as she took pride in her achievement. However, I couldn't help but wonder about her level of pride when news of the senator's misconduct emerged, implicating her as one of his lovers. Why did you disclose that to him? She practically yelled at me over the phone. I didn't. He informed me that your name was on the senator's roster. All I did was confirm the accuracy of your inclusion on the list. I wasn't going to fabricate to spare you from embarrassment. Promiscuous? I am not promiscuous, she screamed at me before I ended the call. I must confess, I chuckled. I also entertained the thought of taking an extended vacation out of town when the news article broke. She messed up literally, and yet I was going to suffer an embarrassing fallout as well. Sherry talked me out of that notion, so to speak. Don't engage in any confrontations. Stick to the truth. She cheated, you divorced her. Move on, Sherry advised. Unfortunately, my children were going to endure verbal bullying for the remainder of their school years. We would be addressing the fact that their mother was a self-centered cheater for years to come. I also sympathized greatly with my ex-in-laws, who had become close friends of ours. After the article came out, we invited them to stay with us in the house we had purchased for a couple of weeks. During that time, they mostly stayed indoors and avoided answering their phones. I love my daughter. You understand how it is when you're a parent. But I'm so ashamed that she thought it was acceptable to act promiscuously for a day, Dad confessed. No father wants his daughter to be seen in that light. As time passed, the scandal faded and life returned to normal. Gradually, my children started spending more time with Cherry, M.O., and me at our home. It wasn't anything formal, but our house naturally became the gathering spot for neighborhood kids. Initially, Hess complained, but I believe Mom smoothed things over. Additionally, I ensured that Elise and Nate maintained open communication with Hess so she couldn't accuse me of taking her children away again. Having Mom and Dad visit frequently helped ease tensions, I think. When the kids were with me, we rarely discussed Hester. Though she remained their mother, she had become an ex in my life. They also avoided mentioning her out of consideration for Sherry, whom they had taken to calling Mom naturally, as M.O. did. Initially, I sensed discomfort from Hester's parents when the kids started referring to Cherry as Mom, but that soon dissipated since they had been close to Cherry even before we got married. Amidst the tumult in my life and my family's, I paid little attention to what was happening in Hester's life. I knew she occasionally dated based on what the kids mentioned, but I was taken aback when Elise announced one afternoon that her mother was engaged. A wave of sadness washed over me for what might have been. Then I felt a comforting embrace wrap around me, and my sadness swiftly transformed into joy for what I now possessed.